Hi, everybody. Welcome to IS 350 Sports and International Affairs. I'm Bill L. Smith, the director of the Martin Institute and the Borer Foundation here at the University of Idaho. I'm also a faculty member in the International Studies program in the School of Global Studies. And in all these roles, we look at the causes of war, the conditions for peace, the international system, how countries act and interact with each other, and how that affects individuals and other groups around the world. I'm often interested in setting up courses that have an overarching theme under which you can explore pretty much any other theme or any other place or any other group of people in the world that interests you. And sports is perfect for that. So sports first has a rhythm. There is an ebb and a flow to international events that involve national teams, clubs, individuals, other groups that come together on a regular basis, not just in the big sports, in the Olympics, or in the World Cup, but all across the spectrum. And as it does so, it provides an avenue for people who are paying attention to sport to also consume other kinds of information, to have those topics sort of raised in their consciousness, because as they're watching sport or they're reading about sport or they're listening to podcasts, they're hearing about other issues, that it's impossible to know that the Qatar World Cup is coming and pay attention to it as a soccer fan and not become aware of human rights issues that are germane to the migrant labor population in Qatar, for example. So you may not be interested in migrant labor, but if you're interested in sports, that issue rises to the fore because you're talking about it. And this class is fundamentally sports and international affairs, right? It's the two linked. So it isn't that we won't talk about, because we will, games, athletes, competitions, sporting organizations, etc., but that we'll do so in the context of how it impacts the way countries act and interact with each other. So this is interesting stuff, and I want to give you a bit of information about how and why these things sort of came to the fore. So I established this class in 2010 or so. And this is the third rebuild. So one of the things that's peculiar in an online class is you kind of have to redo the whole thing instead of just redoing parts of it like you might in class. But there are new things happening all the time in the realm of sports and international affairs. But the genesis for me rests back in my childhood. So I was born in the 1960s, grew up in the 70s and 80s, and for all of that time of my youth, the Cold War was one of the dominant themes in my life and the life of all the peers around me. So the Cold War is this geopolitical competition between the U.S. and its allies and the Soviet Union and its allies, and they're always striving to prove that their ideology, their politics, their economics, their cultural approach, their anything is better than the other, and that there's validity to their regime and the way they approach everything. So they're looking for competition in everything. So it's called a Cold War because we were always competing, and we often had proxy wars where we had allies fighting each other that we were funding and advising, but not fighting each other directly. But the competition took place in all kinds of realms. So if there was a medical conference or an engineering conference or an agricultural conference or things at the UN, there was competition in all these things, always trying to one-up themselves. And obviously there's going to be competition in all those realms. There's going to be competition in sport. So sport for me was this dominant theme. Every time we watched an Olympics or we watched other kinds of programming or read in the papers or read about defections, which we'll look at later in Unit 3, it was a Cold War narrative between the two sides the entirety of my youth. And because of that, I have always had an interest in how sports and international affairs interacted. Also because one of the formative moments of my life when I was a young teen was the Miracle on Ice hockey game in the 1980 Olympics hosted in Lake Placid, New York, where at a time when the United States and U.S. society was kind of reeling through a series of really rough events, our collegiate hockey players beat the Soviet Red Army team in a very memorable match that sort of created hockey fans of all of us, but showed that we were good. I always remember hearing a Brazilian general who was part of a military government when Brazil won the 1970 World Cup. He said, and when they won, we too were good. We too were the best. And they started to feel it collectively because of the sporting victory. And we did. And it's not a thing that happens often in the United States where sports rises to that role, but it did with the Miracle on Ice. So the combination of those two things really propelled me to be interested. The other thing that it did that happened is the way we used to engage with sports was by necessity much broader than the way we engage with sports sports today if we're sports fans. So I grew up on a steady diet of a program on ABC called The Wide World of Sports. So it aired for about 40 years, weekly, sometimes twice weekly, and you got to watch a little bit of everything from all over the world. And so there are sports programs now that focus on global sport, but they don't have the same kind of audience or the same kind of attention or the same amount of investment in them that The Wide World of Sports had. So you got a little bit of soccer, you got motorcycle racing, you got golf, you got Little League World Series, you got basketball, you got track and field, you got on and on and on through The Wide World of Sports. Now, as a soccer fan, I had almost nothing to watch in the 70s and 80s. But as a soccer fan now, I don't need to go outside of my own realm. Like, these are some things that I've watched this summer alone in the MLS and the Premier League, the NWSL, the Nations League, which is a competition in our region between countries. The Women's European Championships were fantastic. There's about a dozen other competitions that I had access to on the television this summer alone. I have no need to engage broadly. I engage narrowly. And it helped me to engage broadly to see all the possibilities. Now, just because the genesis for me of this course lies in the past doesn't mean that the majority of our examples that we'll look at will lie in the past also, because the rhythm of international sports shows us what's happening in the here and now. But a more recent example from about 15 years ago now is Didier Drogba and the Ivory Coast. So if you want to see what's possible with sport, how sport can galvanize a country and create a change, look no further than this. Now, I'm going to give you, right after this, in the course space, will be something called a bonus bit. A bonus bit will be a regular part of any individual unit that you'll be watching, any topic. There'll be a lecture, there'll be some readings, and there'll be some video clips. This video clip will be Didier Drogba addressing the Ivorian public. As you approach the 2006 World Cup and in qualification for it, Ivory Coast was on the verge of qualifying. They were also in the midst of a civil war. So this map on the right, which is the Ivory Coast map, shows the division between North and South. Now, West Africa has several of these divisions because the reach of Christianity historically has gone from the coast inland, and from Islam from inland towards the coast. And so you have many populations that are separated culturally, religiously, ethnically, etc. But in this moment, when Drogba and the Elephants, which is what the team is called, qualified, they go to the locker room and the press is there, and they actually literally beg Ivorians to forgive each other and to talk to each other and to avoid the civil war. And it's a moment where, because of the role the team plays in society, they listen. And because the team is split, they're not all Christians, they're not all Muslims, they're all from the same ethnic group, they listen. And the team does something remarkable. They take their first game after qualification, and they move from the national stadium in the capital to the regional capital in the north, to say, we're a national team, we're going to play in this other part of the nation. And they create this. Watch this video clip, look at it, and just say, my goodness, this ends a civil war, or provides the basis for which the civil war ends. It's what's possible when we look at sports and international affairs and lots more besides. So what are the course goals? So here's the three main goals I want you to look at. And so one of the advantages I have with this sports class is the themes will come back to you for the rest of your lives. And there's not a lot that I teach that I expect students will remember for the rest of their lives, or even talk about for the rest of their lives. But because of that rhythm of international sport, because these things come up regularly, you will recall this stuff, how countries act and interact, what the main venues for interaction is, how the sports space plays in across things. So some of that may not make sense right now, but it will at the end of the class. Just keep in mind, right, it's sports and international affairs. So if someone was only looking at this through the lens of sports, they'd encounter a fella like Abebe Bikila, who's listed here under specific examples. Abebe Bikila, if you Google him or you look on YouTube or his Wikipedia page, you'll see that he was a marathon champion in the 1664 Olympics, and he ran barefoot. And so that's the extent to which most sports fans get. It's exciting, it's interesting. However, the sports and international affairs piece, the 1960 Olympics were held in Rome, Italy. And one of the things that they're trying to do, the International Olympic Committee was trying to do, and the Rome Organizing Committee is trying to do, is show that Italy had rehabilitated and was restoring itself to its grandeur after being part of the Axis powers, what we would call the bad guys in World War II. And so the Olympics is supposed to help show that. And one of the things they wanted to emphasize through the running of the marathon, which was a signature event at the time, was they would run past the great symbols of Italian, Roman, ancient cultures, the ruins, the great monumental architecture, plus newly rebuilt buildings and things to show that, right? And then here comes Abebe Bikila from Ethiopia. Ethiopia was conquered by Italy during World War II, occupied by them in a rather brutal occupation, as occupations tend to be. And so it's only 15 years after the Ethiopians have thrown off the yoke of the Italian oppression. And here they are in the form of Abebe Bikila, running past the field, running past the Italian monuments, and running into the Colosseum. And this moment of grandeur that's supposed to be a moment of grandeur for Italy becomes a moment of this catharsis for Ethiopia. So that's the International Affairs piece, right? You've got Abebe Bikila. He's a great story in sports. He's also a great story in sports and international affairs. So that's the piece that we're going to have to always remember as we go throughout the class. The approach is you're going to have 4 units focused on patterns of Pacific, 7 to 8 topics in each unit. You're going to get a short lecture, 15 minutes is the cap. Some scholarly articles, lots of Sports Illustrated and other really good sports journalistic articles. They've tended to pay attention to this topic more and more deeply than academics have, and even some blog posts. YouTube component will be those bonus bits that'll ask you to watch. They'll give you some really cool visuals to go along with it, and then you'll watch a series of assigned documentaries. You'll get assessed through unit activities. There will be an assignment with each unit. Notes, I'm going to ask you to turn in notes. It's a kind of it's a way to make sure people are paying attention to the course material, since the only way that you're getting information primarily is through these short lectures, discussions, syntheses, etc. So that's the way it's going to roll. And what are we going to do here? Okay, so we're going to have an opening activity that's going to be based on the medal table from the Tokyo Olympics. And I'm going to ask you to look up information about an individual medal winner and to tell us about how that played out for that individual. So here's the top of the table. So 2020-21, right? So the 2020 Olympics delayed into 2021 because of COVID. So we're used to looking at the medal table here, right through the top, because we're competing for total medals. But there's actually, winning a medal is kind of rare. If you look at this, this is the bottom of the table. The countries that won only 1 medal in the Tokyo Olympics. And I have to tell you, a lot more countries didn't win a medal than won a medal. There's 212 Olympic federations. Let's see, what do you get? About 93 or 94 countries won a medal. That means far more than half didn't win anything. And then another couple of, or 15 to 20 won only 1. So that's what we're going to ask you to look at, is what happened in those states that won only 1 medal. How did the country react? What was it like? I can tell you that there are a number of countries where medals are still never happened. That each Olympics you have a series of countries that win their first ever medal. Guatemala, which is in our region, it's not a small country. It won its first ever Olympic medal in 2012 in race walking. And Eric Borondo became a transcendent figure because he's the first gold medalist. He won a gold in London. It becomes an important thing. So you're going to ask you to look up, what was the reception? What was it like there? And so sometimes it's an individual athlete and sometimes it's a team. So Fiji in rugby sevens, and what rugby means to them. We'll look at this a couple of times during the semester, but this will be your first chance. Some of you will get to look at what happened to Fiji. So if you get assigned Fiji, I'll give you a link. You can look up other links too. Go find out how the society reacted. Tell us who the athlete was and what the team was, what they won, and how they were received at home, how you think that matters back home. So I'm also going to ask you to look at a couple of other medal tables besides this one. They are reorganized by per capita GDP, that's the total amount of money in the economy, and population. So how many people in your country did it take to produce a medal? How much money in your economy did it take to produce a medal? Where does the United States rank then? Where does a country like China rank then when because it has more than 2 billion people? Like, what does that look like? So that's where we're going to go and what we're going to do. There is so much fun stuff. I would ask that if I don't know you yet, that you send me an email, give me a call, come by my office in Admin 338 right at the beginning of the semester. Let's establish a relationship and make sure we stay in touch. And otherwise, then participate in the intro activity and we'll get started. And I promise you'll learn a lot and enjoy it.